The restaurant bustled with its usual rhythm that evening, silverware clinking, the faint sound of piano music playing in the background, and the warm chatter of families celebrating birthdays and anniversaries. At the very back of the room, the door creaked open. Slowly, an old man stepped inside. His coat was frayed, the hem of his pants worn thin, and his shoes scuffed from years of use. His gray hair was unkempt, and in his hands he clutched a small leather wallet that looked as tired as he did. The hostess at the front counter glanced at him and hesitated. Her forced smile slipped into a frown. She leaned toward the waiter beside her and whispered, "He looks homeless. Should we even let him sit down?" The old man heard her words. His cheeks flushed, but he straightened his back and spoke softly. "I'd like a table, please." The waiter, a young man eager to impress his manager, rolled his eyes. "Sir, this is a fine dining restaurant. Are you sure you're in the right place?" Other customers turned their heads. Some giggled. A couple shook their heads, muttering things like, "Unbelievable. Why would someone like that come here?" The old man lowered his gaze. His voice trembled. "I just want a warm meal." The waiter sighed dramatically, then guided him to a small table tucked away in the corner, near the restroom doors. It was the least desirable spot, hidden from the main dining area. "Here," the waiter said curtly. "This is all we can offer." When the old man sat down, he gently placed his wallet on the table. He opened it, counting a few crumpled bills and some coins. Then, with trembling hands, he closed it quickly before anyone could see. Moments later, a group of teenagers at the next table began to laugh. One of them whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "He probably can't even afford water." The old man pretended not to hear, but inside, his chest ached. His heart felt heavy, and memories of his younger days, when he had walked into restaurants wearing tailored suits, when he was greeted with respect, flooded his mind. Back then, people had shaken his hand, eager to be in his company. Now, all he received were stares of pity and disdain. The waiter returned, impatience dripping from his tone. "What will you be having?" The old man glanced at the menu, his eyes squinting at the small print. He knew his money wouldn't stretch far. "Just soup. And water, please." The waiter smirked. "Of course." When he walked away, he muttered to another server, "Soup and water, why even bother coming here? He's embarrassing the place." As the minutes passed, the old man waited quietly. He ignored the whispers, the judgmental looks, the pitying stares. He had learned long ago that silence was his only shield. What no one in that restaurant knew, what no one could have imagined, was that this old man carried a truth far greater than his worn clothes suggested. A truth that, once revealed, would leave every single person in that room speechless. And at the center of that truth, was the owner's daughter. She hadn't arrived yet. But when she did, everything would change. Clara stepped gracefully into the dining room, her heels tapping lightly against the polished floor. As the daughter of the restaurant's owner, she often visited without fanfare, preferring to blend in quietly rather than flaunt her connection. But tonight, something immediately unsettled her. Her eyes scanned the tables filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and plates of fine food. Then, in the shadowy corner near the restrooms, she spotted him, the old man. He sat alone at a table that seemed almost hidden from sight. A tiny bowl of soup cooled in front of him. His shoulders were hunched, his clothes threadbare. Yet, there was dignity in the way he held his spoon, even as his hand trembled. Clara's brow furrowed. She turned to one of the waiters. "Why is that gentleman seated back there?" The young waiter shifted uncomfortably. "Well, Miss Clara, he didn't seem like our usual clientele. We thought he might be more comfortable away from the others." Her eyes narrowed. More comfortable, or less visible? The waiter flushed red but said nothing. Clara didn't need an answer, she already knew. She walked slowly toward the corner, her presence drawing curious glances from nearby diners. When the old man noticed her approach, he quickly tried to straighten his posture, as if embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable state. "Good evening," he murmured politely, his voice hoarse. "Good evening, sir," Clara replied warmly, pulling out the chair opposite him. "May I sit?" The old man blinked in surprise. "Of course." Clara placed her hands gently on the table. "I couldn't help noticing you've been seated here in the corner. I'm sorry if our staff made you feel unwelcome." He smiled faintly, though his eyes betrayed years of disappointment. "It's all right. I've grown used to it." Clara's heart tightened. No one should ever get used to being treated that way. At that moment, the waiter arrived with another table's order, but when he saw Clara sitting with the old man, he froze. His eyes widened, panic flickering across his face. Clara looked up sharply. "Bring this gentleman the menu again, please. And tell the chef he may order whatever he likes, on the house." The waiter stammered, "But." "No buts," Clara said firmly, her tone carrying the unmistakable authority of the owner's daughter. The old man's lips trembled. "That's very kind of you, miss, but I don't wish to be a burden. I came only for a warm bowl of soup." Clara leaned forward. "Sir, you are not a burden. You're our guest. And every guest deserves respect." For the first time that evening, the old man's tired eyes softened. He looked at her as though she were someone he had once known, someone who reminded him of a past he rarely revisited. "You remind me," he whispered, almost to himself, "of someone very dear to me." Clara tilted her head, curiosity flickering. But before she could ask more, a group of diners at the next table began whispering and giggling, their eyes darting toward the old man. Clara noticed. Her jaw tightened. The truth was clear, people judged him by his appearance alone. What they didn't know, what they couldn't even imagine, was that this man carried a secret, one that would soon silence every cruel whisper in the room. And Clara, she was about to discover it first. The air in the restaurant grew heavier as Clara sat across from the old man. Conversations continued around them, but for her, the noise had faded into the background. She was focused entirely on him, the lines etched deep into his face, the quiet sadness in his eyes, and the way his hands trembled slightly when he lifted his spoon. "Sir," Clara said gently, "may I ask your name?" The old man hesitated, as if saying it aloud carried weight. Finally, he replied, "Henry." "Henry," Clara repeated softly, her voice carrying warmth. "It's a pleasure to meet you. Tell me, do you live nearby?" Henry gave a faint smile. "Nearby enough. I've been in this city most of my life. It's changed a great deal, though not always for the better." Clara nodded thoughtfully. Change can be hard. But sometimes the city forgets the people who helped build it. Henry looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression shifted. A flicker of recognition passed through his eyes, though he quickly masked it with a sip of soup. Before Clara could ask more, the waiter returned nervously, setting a new plate in front of Henry: steak, roasted vegetables, and fresh bread. The staff rarely served such dishes to anyone who looked like him, and the waiter's reluctance was plain. Clara caught his hesitation and spoke firmly. "Thank you. That will be all." Henry stared at the plate, his lips parting slightly. His hands shook as he reached for the knife and fork. "It's been years since I've had a meal like this." Clara smiled. "Then tonight, you'll enjoy every bite." As he began to eat slowly, savoring each flavor, Clara leaned back in her chair, studying him. His manners were impeccable, far too refined for someone the staff had assumed was nothing more than a beggar. Every motion, every gesture, hinted at a man who once lived a very different life. "Henry," Clara said quietly, "forgive me if I'm too forward, but I sense you're not who people here think you are." Henry paused. The fork hovered midway to his mouth. For a moment, it seemed he might deny it, but then he sighed and set it down gently. "You have a sharp eye, young lady." His voice was steady but laced with pain. "The truth is, I wasn't always like this. I wasn't always," he gestured to his frayed coat, his worn shoes. "A man people whisper about." Clara leaned in, her heart quickening. "Then who were you?" Henry hesitated, his gaze drifting across the restaurant, watching the wealthy patrons laughing, sipping their wine, and carrying on as though he were invisible. His jaw clenched. "I was someone who built things," he said at last. "I had a company. Dozens of workers under my care. I provided jobs, built homes, invested in schools. I believed in this community." His voice grew rough. "And yet, when hardship came, when tragedy struck, it all vanished. Friends disappeared. The world turned its back." Clara felt a pang in her chest. She knew he wasn't exaggerating. She could hear the truth in his tone, the voice of a man who had once stood tall, only to be knocked down when life grew cruel. "Henry," she whispered. "What happened?" He opened his mouth to answer, but at that very moment, a commotion arose near the entrance. The restaurant owner, Clara's father, had arrived. And the instant he saw Henry sitting there, recognition flashed across his face. The moment her father's eyes landed on Henry, Clara noticed it. His confident stride faltered, his lips parted slightly, and his face drained of color. For a man known for his commanding presence, the reaction was startling. "Dad?" Clara rose to her feet, confusion flickering in her eyes. "Do you know him?" Her father ignored the question at first, striding quickly toward their table. The waiters scurried out of his way, their curious glances darting between Henry and their employer. "Henry," her father's voice cracked, trembling between disbelief and something deeper, fear. Henry looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. "It's been a long time, Richard." The name struck Clara like a bell. Richard, her father's name. He did know this man. "What's going on here?" Clara asked, her voice tightening. "How do you know him?" Her father's jaw clenched. "Clara, this is not the place." But Henry leaned back in his chair, folding his hands calmly in front of him, though his eyes carried years of sorrow. "Oh, I think this is exactly the place, Richard. For too long, the truth has been hidden behind velvet curtains and expensive wine." The room fell into an uneasy hush. Conversation stilled. People sensed something important was unfolding. Clara's heart pounded. "Please, someone explain." Henry's voice was low, deliberate. "Your father and I weren't always strangers, Clara. Once, we were partners." Clara's head snapped toward her father. "Partners?" Her father's eyes darkened, a storm brewing in them. "Henry, don't." But Henry continued, unflinching. "We built a business together, one that thrived. But when tragedy struck me, when I needed help most." Richard turned away. No, worse than that. He didn't just turn away. He took everything. Gasps rippled through the nearby tables. Clara's throat went dry. "Dad, is that true?" Her father's fists tightened. "It's not that simple." Henry's eyes blazed with quiet anger. "It's exactly that simple. I lost my wife to illness. The medical bills consumed everything. I begged you for time, for help, for understanding. Instead, you seized control. You pushed me out of the company we built together, our dream. And when I had nothing left, you erased my name from it, as though I had never existed." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara's chest ached as she looked at her father, searching his face for denial, for some shred of defense. But his silence was damning. "Dad," Clara whispered, hurt heavy in her tone. "Is this true?" Her father turned to her, his eyes pained. "Clara, I did what I thought was necessary. The company was on the line. It was survival." "Survival for you," Henry shot back. "Not for me. Not for my family." The weight of his words pressed down on Clara like a stone. She suddenly saw her father not just as the successful businessman she admired, but as a man capable of betrayal. Henry's voice softened, though it carried the sting of decades. "I didn't care about wealth. I only wanted honesty, fairness, brotherhood. But Richard chose greed over loyalty. And that choice led me here." Clara's heart twisted. She looked at Henry, this frail, shamed old man, and then at her father, standing tall yet visibly shaken. Two lives intertwined by trust, then torn apart by betrayal. The restaurant buzzed with hushed whispers. Patrons leaned closer, hanging on every word. For once, Clara didn't care about appearances, reputations, or the polished image her family had always projected. She cared about the truth. "Henry," she said softly, turning to him, "why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you tell anyone?" Henry's eyes dimmed with weariness. "When you've lost everything, Clara, fighting feels like shouting into the wind. I had no strength left. My only hope was that someday, someone would see me, not as the beggar people think I am, but as the man I used to be." Clara reached across the table, covering his weathered hand with hers. "I see you." Her words broke something in the room. A hush fell deeper, as though time itself had paused. Henry's eyes glistened with gratitude, while her father's face crumpled with guilt. But Clara wasn't finished. She turned to her father, her voice steady though her heart was racing. "Dad, if you wronged him, if you built everything we have on his pain, then we owe him. We all do." Her father looked at her, torn between pride and shame. His lips parted as though to argue, but no words came. For the first time in Clara's life, she saw her father not as unshakable, but as deeply, painfully human. Henry leaned back, his gaze fixed on Richard. "The question now is not about the past, Richard. It's about what you'll do with the present." The restaurant was silent, every eye fixed on the three figures caught in a storm of truth. Clara's pulse thudded in her ears. She felt torn in two, one part still the loyal daughter who had looked up to her father her whole life, the other part the young woman who could not ignore injustice when it stood before her. Her father's shoulders slumped, his carefully crafted aura of power and control shattered. Richard Richards, the man who commanded boardrooms and silenced competitors, now stood exposed, just a man who had made choices that haunted him. "Henry," his voice broke, heavy with years of unspoken guilt. "I was wrong." Clara's breath caught. She had never heard her father admit fault so plainly. Henry's eyes softened, though they still carried the weight of the past. "Those words, they don't undo the nights I spent in the cold, the years I lived as a shadow of myself. But perhaps, they're a start." Clara squeezed Henry's hand gently. "Dad, this isn't just about apologies. It's about making it right." Her father looked at her, his eyes wet. For the first time, Clara saw him not as a giant, but as a man who feared losing the respect of his daughter. "What do you suggest?" he asked quietly. Clara's voice was steady, though her heart raced. "Henry's name belongs where it was erased. On the company. On its history. On its future. Everything we've built, everything you claim as success, was born from both of you. And the world deserves to know the truth." Whispers rippled again through the restaurant. The onlookers, once amused by the spectacle of an old man being mocked, now witnessed a reckoning. Her father swallowed hard. "You're right. His name should never have been taken away." He turned to Henry, his voice trembling. "I can't change the past, but I can restore what was stolen. I'll reinstate your legacy. The company records, the archives, the brand, your name will stand beside mine again." Henry's lips quivered, his hardened exterior cracking. He had waited decades for justice, and though it could never erase the pain, it gave him something he thought he'd never have again: dignity. "Thank you," Henry whispered, voice husky. "Not for me, but for her." He nodded toward Clara. "She deserves to grow in truth, not in shadows." Clara's eyes brimmed with tears. She rose to her feet, standing tall between the two men, her hand resting on Henry's shoulder. "Then let this be the beginning. Not of shame, not of bitterness, but of healing." The restaurant erupted in soft applause. Strangers, who had once sneered at Henry's ragged coat, now clapped for the courage of truth and reconciliation. Richard blinked in disbelief at the crowd, but slowly, he allowed the applause to wash over him, not as praise, but as a reminder that true respect came not from power or money, but from humility. Henry stood shakily, his frame still frail, but his spirit visibly lighter. He looked at Clara, then at Richard. "Perhaps," he said softly, "there's hope yet. Not just for us, but for what comes after." Clara smiled, her heart swelling. For the first time that night, she felt proud, not of her father's wealth, not of the restaurant's grandeur, but of the courage it took to face the truth. As the applause died down, she leaned closer to Henry. "From now on, you'll never eat alone again." Henry's eyes filled with gratitude. "Bless you, child." Her father exhaled slowly, as though releasing years of guilt in a single breath. "Henry, will you allow me a chance to make amends?" Henry studied him for a long, weighted moment. Then, with the faintest nod, he said, "We shall see, Richard. Redemption is not claimed in words, but proven in deeds." The old man's dignity was restored. The daughter's faith in truth had been rewarded. And the father, powerful, flawed, and humbled, had been given one final chance to prove that even the deepest wounds could begin to heal. As they walked out together, Clara knew one thing: the night that began with cruelty and shame had ended with revelation and hope. And though the scars of the past could never be erased, the future still had room for forgiveness.